Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. Mark and Sandra entered the bustling restaurant, looking around the room expectantly. They couldn't wait to reunite with their families for a long-awaited dinner. As they entered, they noticed Paul and Lucy, Sandra's children, sitting in a quiet and secluded booth with Lizzie, Mark's daughter. Assuming that their spouses must have left for a short time or were late, they approached the table with smiles, unaware of the unexpected conversation that awaited them. Mark smoothly slid into the booth, pulled out a chair, and got comfortable. Sandra followed suit, her gaze briefly scanning the surroundings before joining him. Ignoring the unusual circumstances, they took their seats, ready to enjoy a joyful evening together, completely unaware of the shocking revelation that was about to happen. Mark pulled out a chair and plopped into a booth, greeting the group with a cheerful, "Hello, kids." Sandra, after looking around the restaurant, followed suit and pulled out her own chair before asking, "Where are Jim and Sarah?" Paul intervened, explaining, "We asked them to give us some time alone with you." Sandra's smile widened. "Is there any important news? I think we should be flattered that you wanted to tell us first." Lizzie replied with a serious expression on her face, "I think it's more because we wanted to share something that we learned." Mark, noticing the change in tone, asked anxiously, "You're all talking so seriously. What's happening? Everything is fine." His gaze shifted to his daughter. Lizzie was silent. Lucy, seemingly not at all embarrassed by the seriousness of the conversation, said, addressing Sandra, her mother, "Pineapple fudge." Sandra had a lump in her throat, momentarily leaving her speechless. Her face paled, becoming like a ghostly sheet as she tried to make sense of the unfolding conversation. Mark, completely baffled by the sudden turn of events, replied with a puzzled expression, and there was clearly confusion in his voice. "Pineapple fudge? What are you talking about?" Lizzie, taking the opportunity to shed light on the situation, turned to her father with a leading question. "Good question, Dad. Sandra, do you want to explain to him?" Sandra's daughter Lucy intervened again, adding a note of sarcasm to her words. "Yes, Mom. Don't you want to explain to my biological father what pineapple fudge means?" Sandra, struggling with the shock of being faced with such a revelation, muttered, trying to collect her thoughts. I'm waiting. How are you? Where did you hear about pineapple fudge?" Paul, keeping a straight face, intervened, shedding light with a hint of accusation in his voice. "From your diaries, of course. Where do you write everything down, right? This is your secret code for, 'Today I had sex with a man who is not my husband, but is considered his best friend,' isn't it?" His gaze shifted from his mother to Mark and back again, indignation reflected in his eyes, not particularly hidden by his voice. Lucy, feeling the weight of this revelation, expressed a bittersweet feeling. "I always wanted to have an older sister." As she spoke, she surreptitiously squeezed Paul's hand, which she was holding under the table. Her gaze shifted to Lizzie, and she added with genuine tenderness, "And I've known and loved Lizzie all my life," also gently squeezing Lizzie's hand. But then her tone changed, filled with contempt as she turned her attention to Mark. "But it's still a little shocking to hear that we have a common biological father." The weight of her words hung in the air, highlighting the deep sense of betrayal and resentment she felt towards Mark and Sandra, whose actions destroyed the foundation and trust of both families. Paul, with a mixture of annoyance and disappointment in his voice, told Mark the truth, which finally came out. "Did you really think we'd never find out?" In the world of DNA testing, genetic diseases, and pedigree research, it's pretty clear that sooner or later this will come out. Mark paused, realizing the full weight of Paul's words, before switching to a defensive tone. "Look, guys, we're really sorry that you had to find out about this, but it shouldn't change anything. Lucy, Paul, I'm still the same Uncle Mark that you've known all your life." His attempt to reassure them seemed weak in the face of shattered trust. Continuing his explanation, Mark pleaded, "Jim and Sarah don't need to know about this. It will only harm them and will not do any good." In his quest to protect life stability, Mark failed to feel the profound impact that this revelation has already had on the dynamics of their families. Jim's voice broke through the tension, hitting Mark and Sandra when they realized their missing partners had approached the table unnoticed. "It's a little late for that, old friend. You're about 3 months late." Jim pulled out a chair and sat down. The weight of his words hung in the air like a lump, emphasizing the depth of betrayal. Sarah joined them at the table, her face showing anger and disappointment. Besides, Jim found out first and told me before we decided to tell the children together. She sat down, and there was pent-up rage in her movements. There was boiling anger in her voice as she addressed Sandra directly. Sarah's words were laced with sharp sarcasm. And now, after our weekend with Jim, I really don't think that no benefit is a sufficient assessment. She grinned at Sandra, and Sarah's face was a mixture of indignation and mockery. Sandra, I can't understand what was going on in your miserable head. Did you trade a Michelin-starred chocolate ganache for a stale, dried piece of pineapple fudge? I'm glad the kids insisted on extra time because I could barely walk here from our hotel room. Mark's shock quickly turned to anger when he realized the truth. His voice trembled with a mixture of disbelief and indignation. Wait, you and Jim? Are you having an affair? Lucy, even though she was angry, couldn't help but laugh bitterly at the irony of Mark's reaction. Are you really upset about this? Aren't you being too hypocritical? There was a slight sarcasm in her words, emphasizing double standards. Sandra, who was gradually regaining her composure, intervened in a calm but decisive tone. Wait. If you two were together, then we're even. Jim, you got your revenge. She met the accusing glances of her children and her husband. Now we have to figure out how to move forward and work on rebuilding both our families. There was a glimmer of determination in her eyes as she took on the role of host. Sandra's voice grew stronger as she continued, determination guiding her words. It shouldn't change anything. Mark and I will end our affair, and both of you will end yours. We can all get through this. There was conviction in those words, as if she was determined to pave the way for healing and restoration in the face of shattered trust. A mixture of shock and intense anger flashed in Jim's eyes as he listened to Sandra's attempt to level the playing field. His voice was dripping with bitterness as he replied, Well, that may seem fair to some, my dear. That would be the case if it wasn't completely idiotic. He paused, his anger simmering. The words poured out in a torrent of pain from betrayal. You've been having an affair with this bag of shit for 20 years. You conceived a child together and told me that he was mine. All this time, Sarah and I have been friends, close friends, but we have never done anything inappropriate. How the hell does that make us equal? Sandra's puzzlement was evident when she replied, Sarah just said that you spent the weekend together. Sarah's mocking tone cut through the air as she objected. We did it, and it was magical. Honey, it turns out that at our age, not all guys suck that much. She grinned, clearly enjoying the opportunity to tease her husband. Lucy playfully intervened, interjecting, Phew, Mom. If Sandra had been in a more stable frame of mind, she would have noticed that her daughter called another woman Mom, but in her confusion, she did not notice it. She'll figure it out soon enough. Jim's voice hardened as he continued, a tinge of triumph in his words. But you're wrong, Sandra. We've never had an affair, because by the time I touched Sarah intimately for the first time, we had both already filed official divorce papers. You were too busy on your business trip for the weekend for us to bother to serve you, but... He raised his hand, pointing at the man standing by the door. The atmosphere became tense. The unknown man reacted to Jim's gesture and approached the table. He wasted no time in delivering his message in a cold and formal voice. Sandra Davis, Mark Willis, you have been served. He handed each of them a brown manila envelope, the contents of which were not a secret. The man then stepped back, taking out his camera to capture the moment before nodding to Jim and walking away, leaving the culprit stunned and confused. There was silence at the table as Mark and Sandra exchanged glances, frantically trying to make sense of the sudden turn of events. The weight of these envelopes completely changed their lives, adding another layer of uncertainty to a troubled situation. Sandra's composure was shaken, her voice was shaking with despair, and tears were streaming down her face. I don't want a divorce. This is not how it should have happened. Mark and I don't love each other. It didn't mean anything. I love you, Jim. I've always loved only you. Her words are filled with pain, she begged her husband, hoping to save their ruined relationship. Sandra looked from Jim to Lucy and Paul, her children, her voice choked with excitement. Lucy, Polly, tell him. Tell your father that this should not destroy our family. Her pleas were addressed to the children, in the hope that they would help bridge the gap between the parents. Mark, who was sitting in silence, seemed completely broken. His face reflected the enormous pain he was experiencing. He seemed lost, unable to find the right words to express the depth of his remorse and regret. In a silent act of solidarity and support, Jim, Sarah, Paul, Lucy, and Lizzie put their hands on the table, interlacing their fingers. Their combined demonstration highlighted their commitment to each other, recognition of the challenges they face, and giving each other the strength and support they need to look to the future. Jim's stern voice echoed around the room, attracting attention and signaling that it was time for Sandra to listen. The weight of the decision made by all five was obvious. Sandra, I think it's time for you to shut up and listen. The five of us have been discussing how to proceed for a month now. All our ducks are ready, and as far as I understand, none of this is subject to revision. Lizzie intervened in a decisive tone, confirming the unity of their decision. We thought about it long and hard separately and then relied on each other to decide how to proceed. We are unanimous in this. She glanced at Paul and Lucy, paying tribute to their collective efforts. I'll just add that the three of us came up with this, and your spouses initially tried to dissuade us. Paul, speaking with a sense of maturity and determination, emphasized the seriousness of the situation. My younger sister may be the youngest at the table, but now she is an adult, and she has a wise head on her shoulders. She suffered from this in the most direct way, so we asked her to tell you how things will develop further. Lucy, sniffing but gathering her strength, spoke with a mixture of pain and determination. In short, it is so. She turned to Mark, her voice firm and unyielding. Mark, you provided your liquid, but you have never been and never will be my father. Her gaze returned to Sandra, and her expression hardened. Sandra, you've been my mother all my life. Not as good a mother as my father was, but my mother nonetheless. Well, it ends tonight. From now on, you and I have no relationship. I don't want to talk to you, read your messages, or make any contact at all. This may change in the future, but I wouldn't bet on it. If that happens, it will be my decision. I'm sure you're against it, but I want none of you to ever contact me again. I can assure you that I will not respond. Paul, looking at his shattered and almost catatonic mother, shared Lucy's feelings. The same applies to me. Lizzie, determined and unyielding, joined in her voice. And to me too. Sarah, calmly but harshly, touched on the practical aspect of their solution. Jim and I have a common lawyer, whose details are listed in those envelopes that you are holding in your hands. All contacts should now be made only through a lawyer. There was an awkward silence at the table when the weight of what was said reached everyone. The way forward has been mapped out, and the consequences of their choice will undoubtedly change their lives. Jim, after a meaningful pause, allowed the silence to thicken, giving Sandra and Mark time to realize the seriousness of what had been revealed. Breaking the silence, he moved on to the next question. All 8 grandparents were informed about this today. He looked at Sandra. Your parents, he nodded, and yours, pointing to Mark, have done nothing wrong, and we don't want to cut them out of their grandchildren's lives. There was care and attentiveness in his words because he always respected and loved his relatives. Jim continued, emphasizing all the conditions. However, their further participation depends on whether they accept this situation. They should not send any messages from you to the children, and will not give you the latest news about any aspects of our lives. He made it clear that the boundaries set for Sandra and Mark extended to their parents as well. Although they can maintain a relationship with you, this should in no way interfere with us or affect the dynamics of our family. Mark, your mom and dad really want to get to know their new granddaughter better, and we will definitely support Lucy in getting to know them. At the same time, it is not surprising that this does not change anything for my parents. They love Lucy more than anything in the world, and nothing will ever change that. The once unified family structure has been changed forever, and new boundaries will change the relationship not only between Sandra, Mark, and the children, but also between their parents and grandchildren. Sarah joined in. We're not leaving. This is not New York or Los Angeles. We may run into each other in a restaurant or on the street. Her tone was filled with anger, a sense of warning, and a clear boundary. With palpable restraint, Sarah continued, determination in her voice. I would strongly advise you both to pretend that you don't know me. It took all my self-control not to spank you both here tonight. The depth of her anger was obvious, and it was clear that maintaining composure in future confrontations might not be an easy task. Then Lizzie's voice took on a more positive, albeit forced tone, and it was her turn. But in a way, Sandra, you were right. Her words hung in the air, attracting the attention of everyone at the table. A noticeable shift occurred when Lizzie turned to Aunt Sandra, abandoning the usual affectionate treatment and calling her simply Sandra. It was a subtle but significant sign of a strained relationship. She paused briefly before delivering the unexpected news, her tone still laced with a mixture of emotions. I want to share the good news. Actually, there are two good news. Paul and I are getting married, and it will happen soon because in about 7 months your first grandson will join us. For a moment, a spark of joy flashed in Sandra's eyes when she heard this news, but the severity of the previous discussion quickly cooled her down. Similarly, the look of hope on Mark's face wavered as he realized the difficult consequences of the situation. Paul, pushing aside any positivity, spoke bluntly, his voice filled with a mixture of disappointment and determination. Lizzie and I have been talking about how your betrayal has affected our relationship. It's damn weird that we have a stepsister in common now. But after all, we've been inseparable since the very first day we met in the playgroup. There was a note of bitterness in his words, but also a determined refusal to let their parents' actions destroy the bond between the children. Although it will always be overshadowed by the fact that it was there that you first met, there is no reason to let your terrible behavior ruin our relationship, Lizzie continued. The child appeared unexpectedly, and it happened earlier than we originally planned, but we always wanted to have children. There was sincerity in her words, reflecting a deep desire for stability and love in the midst of chaos. Her voice was gaining strength. Our parents, the two that are left, are very supportive of our decision to start a family now. Lizzie highlighted the support they received from Jim and Sarah, who were by their side at this crucial moment. The unwavering support of their parents provided a glimmer of hope amid all these upheavals, a reminder that there were still foundations of love and care to rely on. But no matter what you may think about how things will change in the future, know this, Paul stated in an unwavering tone. You will not be present at our wedding. You will not be present at the birth of your first grandchild or any subsequent ones. You won't spoil them, play with them, or babysit them to give us a day off. His words painted a picture of severe restrictions. He glanced at Sandra. A mixture of emotions reflected on his face before continuing. You won't get their photos, you won't hear their first words, and you won't catch them when they fall. The weight of these words was palpable, illustrating the deep loss that both sides would experience. He looked at Jim, and there was a flash of appreciation and respect in his eyes. Mom, he turned to Sarah, trying a new way of addressing her for the first time. The subtle change in his manner carried a deep meaning, signaling a change in their relationship. Paul's voice softened as he realized the burden that Jim and Sarah would now bear. Mom and Dad will have to take on the burden of being the only grandparents. Despite the seriousness of the conversation, Sarah couldn't help but smile at the thought of becoming a grandmother and the fact that Paul called her Mom. After delivering the final blow, Paul turned to Mark. Mark, you're not walking Lizzie down the aisle. This honor will go to the Pope. Frankly, you've already given up the right to give it away. There was a firm determination in Jim's voice when he raised the issue of making these changes widely known. Sarah and I have done nothing wrong, and therefore we do not intend to hide the reasons for the breakdown of our marriages from friends and acquaintances. Barely audible, Lucy continued. I want people to know. I want people to know why I completely cut you out of my life, Mom, so that you would be judged harshly, not me. Her desire for others to understand the severity of the decision reflected her need for approval and appreciation. I don't want you to be at my graduation next month. Yes, this is a public event and I cannot forbid you to attend it. Lucy's voice was stronger, a mixture of determination and concern for her reputation. But I've earned the respect of my teachers and my friends' parents, and I don't want to lose that by spitting at you if you show up. Lizzie intervened with a wry smile, adding a touch of humor to the tense atmosphere. Unless, of course, before that, Sandra, your mother has not decorated you yet. There was a hint in her words that if Mark and Sandra did not listen to what was said, the consequences could be serious and physical. All 5 of them rose from their seats, leaving Sandra and Mark alone with their shattered world. One last thing, Jim began decisively, his gaze focused on the cheating ex-spouses. I had a loving friendship with Sarah for 20 years. It doesn't take much effort to turn this into a loving relationship. He pointed at Sarah, acknowledging the depth of their bond. I've already fallen in love with her, just because of her support over the past 3 months. He looked directly at Sandra and Mark. Betrayal won't break me, and I won't let it break Sarah. There was a determined challenge in his words, a refusal to succumb to the pain he was causing. You may have laughed at us behind our backs for the last 20 years, but for the next 50 I will laugh with Sarah. He emphasized the joy and happiness that awaited him and Sarah, free from the burden of a broken relationship. Turning to Sarah, Jim softened his tone. Sarah, I fell in love with you. It's too early to expect you to feel the same way, but I want you to give me a chance. There was a plea in his words, a request for patience and the opportunity to build something new. And when you do, Jim continued, his voice growing stronger, I want us to dedicate our future to each other in front of God and our children. Our partners, it seems, did not take their vows seriously, but we did not change them, and we can be sure that our attitude towards our future vows will be just as deep and felt. When Jim first spoke to Sarah, it was quite possible that it was too early for Sarah to have the same deep feelings for him that he had for her. But looking at her tear-stained smile, it was obvious to anyone that by this time she already felt the same way. Jim and Sarah hugged and followed their 3 children out, united and ready to forge a new path together, guided by love and determination to find happiness among the ruins. Sandra and Mark were left to deal with the consequences of their actions.